Hello, everyone. Uh, as you know, I'm Corey Hickson. I'm here to present about the education part of this executive summary for Project Empathy. Project Empathy education has a mission statement. We're creating a way society can reduce human suffering by employing classrooms that can teach skills for coping and maintaining a mindful awareness of self. And if you look at this, there's a lot of key terms in our statement. And our mission statement continues: creating and modeling worldwide compassionate solutions created to reduce human suffering while advocating for and supporting mindfulness within community education programs. The key words that you probably already know, you might have heard of mindfulness, mindful awareness, those kinds of things. I'm going to be defining how these key terms fit into an education program that we've designed. The presentation elements include a lecture. That's me. I'll be the talking head today. But don't worry, I don't talk the entire time. Sometimes I do ask questions. So we have a lot of audience participation. There's Q&A sessions throughout the presentation, which today I think will be about an hour long. There are some videos accessible outside on the internet, and some links, multimedia elements that you'll be able to retrieve later on your favorite internet-connected device. And we have audience activities. There are some interesting activities that will help to teach the way that learning occurs, as you're about to find out, as a aesthetic pattern in our lives. To start, we should probably talk about empathy. There's another process in literature and a lot of research on both sides of this definition. Empathy and mentalization, as it's called, is the ability to understand how another is feeling and to be able to relate to that. We know that from a researcher, Stephen Mithen's work, and some of the descriptions of the modular theory of mind and iterations thereof, that human beings have an intuitive way of understanding others' emotions. And the reason for this is that from the evolutionary perspective, that it evolved as a part of survival and surviving in groups. So to be able to work together on teams and in groups, people had to understand their own sense of empathy. And according to the modular theory of mind, this spontaneously grew by goodness of fit with the process of evolution. So there's also an intuitive ecology that's iterated. This is one of the things that helps us understand our place in the ecosystem. Some researchers have gone on about the importance of understanding ecological intelligence. Daniel Goleman is one of them. And this is also another one of those intuitive ideas that seems to have built itself into the human psyche as a means of surviving, and surviving in an ecosystem and being able to live sustainably. Empathy helps to increase the holistic health, as we have fewer conflicts while going out into the world and mitigating the world and being part of society. We're happier when there are fewer conflicts, and other people also likewise would be happier without conflicts with us as individuals. Happier people overall tend to heal faster and tend to get sick less often, and also tend to have more healthy societies. The social improvements from having reduced sense of conflict in between ourselves and the larger society are numerous, and we'll cover them later in this presentation. Education can be improved. Conflict between groups in society in schools is reduced, and people learn to practice empathy. This solves the problem of bullying. Bullying has been implicated in the larger social problems that we know of, violence in schools. And reducing bullying is reducing the risk of violence, as well as increasing the communal health that people experience in schools, as well as making it more possible for people to function on teams and to learn in teams, as we're going to learn about later in this presentation. Mindfulness, reciprocally, can be understood through empathy and practicing empathy, and practicing mindfulness can also increase the skills for empathy. And mindfulness practice is an important part of health, as we'll see later in this presentation. Social group cohesion is improved through empathy as people work together and understand others' perspectives increasingly well. We develop shared values, shared norms, and we have shared experience that help to make it so that each team and each group and each school or place of work has a more cohesive work unit, and society can then benefit from the cohesion of these groups and also the reduced amount of out-group bias demonstrated in interpersonal and intergroup functions. So this is our breaking point here. This is where we get to do one of the audience activities. Oh joy. So here we have a handout for you to fill out. What you do is you just indicate all of your favorite things in each category. And in a moment, I'll ask you to circulate and mingle and find out if there's anybody else in the class who has the same thing mentioned in the same category. And when you do, just sign each other's papers. After this, it's not a competition, but after this, we'll see who has the most signatures, or the least signatures, as it were. Exploration and discovery. This is part of creating a constructivist classroom, based on aspects of social learning and constructive learning that has to do with creating a shared epistemology and creating a shared way of learning information among all of the cohorts in the group. And this has also been adapted by an author that we found as a means of creating classrooms that can live up to the already existing standards that we have in the education system, while still being capable of using constructive learning and teamwork. And in that theory, there is the difference between the exploration and the discovery for self-directed learners while they're choosing to learn about the subject that meets the standard, and it's a process. And this is one of the theories that I'll elaborate just briefly. At first, confusion is a sense that we all get when we don't really know exactly what the definitions are, right? Well, confusion is to learning like nausea is to eating. It's that sense that, we're hungry or we need to learn something. And so there's kind of that mental grumbling where it's just like, wait, I don't understand this yet. There's more that I've got to know. And so something new needs to be learned. And there's a process of going out and discovering what needs to be learned through the process of exploration. So the first element of this is the sensation that something new needs to be learned. The second strata, the second process in the phase is called exploration. And this is when we kind of go first, survey briefly the area of knowledge, content knowledge that we need to know. And second is discovery. And that's the more deep dive into the content knowledge that we find will actually help make resolution with the confusion that occurred, and to be able to resolve the sense of confusion and to continue having learned the new information and develop the new skills for. Now this fits into what's called the Gestalt learning cycle. Now the slide's incorrect on this one. It says traditional learning. Well, it's traditional learning in a conventional sense, I suppose is the way to put it. Because I'll revisit the idea of traditional learning a little later on in the circle processes. But as you can see, with Zinker's learning cycle, the process of learning is cyclical. This is where this begins, that initial moment of sensation or confusion that occurs. That's usually the indication, right, that something new needs to be learned. So there's the sensation, and then we become aware that something new needs to be learned. It's not just a grumbling in the stomach. It's, wait, I need to solve this with learning something. I need to solve this with new information. The next phase, of course, is mobilization. That's when we really do start going to the exploration phase and trying to find out, what's new, what information would be useful to discover and to begin building a knowledge base around. And that building knowledge base around is the action phase, where we're taking action to go find the research that we need or the information that we need. And at some point, that information, when we're well educated enough about a subject, or well trained, or well aware enough of something new that we needed to learn. It doesn't have to be textbooks and materials, but that sensation of confusion makes contact with the successful activation, mobilization of the learning skills, and they connect. And so the underlying need to know something has met the objective knowledge of something. And that's kind of like a peak experience, which we'll talk about with Abraham Maslow, a little bit of a different kind. But it's an experience that someone is aware that they are now have accommodated or assimilated new information that changes, their perspective in moving in toward resolution. With this new information, we have to be able to resolve it somehow into the identities that we all project into the world. And this resolution then leads into a rest phase, where we've accommodated the knowledge into our identities and shared it perhaps in a larger context, and now are resting and waiting for the next sensation that something new needs to be learned. As teachers, I suppose one thing to do is to confuse people. No? Okay, well, that's kind of like what it is. It's to show people that there are new things out there that do need to be learned, and to give people the skills to go out and learn them, and learn to learn them, actually, in a way that promotes their own self-discovery abilities and their own self-engagement, and in the group, the engagement with the group and the shared epistemology, which is referred to as epistemic engagement. Okay, so this is our next audience activity. We have another worksheet that shows the way to organize ourselves into 4 groups, and the activity that we'll do is based on those 4 groups. So what I want everyone to do is listen to these statements and just pick the one, as briefly as you can, pick the one that most identifies with you. The first one is, I like to solve problems immediately. Does anybody like to solve problems immediately? Okay, so everyone there will go to your left of the room, that's over here. Okay, and then the other group is, I tend to take some time to work through and create the solution for my problems. That everyone will be on your right. Okay, and now what I'd like is for people to, if you like to understand the feelings associated with information, kind of more of a person that likes to understand the social aspect of those kinds of things, you'll go toward the back of the room. And if you just want to associate with the data, and all you really want to know are the statistics, and you like to have those solutions right away first, you'll go over here to the back of the room. Now everybody should be in 4 groups, and the exercise is pretty simple. What you'll need to do is take a Sharpie with the pads that you have there and write down everything that's like your group. What is awesome about your group and having the characteristics that your group has. And then on the next page, as you all decide, write out the things that other people need to know about your group, and the things, and then the next page, you'll write the things that you don't think are so awesome when people approach your group. What really annoys you when your group interacts with people in a different way. And we'll go through and process these things. So I'll come around and help people out with this part of the exercise. Thanks. The questions people tend to have most. Okay, so this is the slide. What we're doing now is Q&A. So we're going to go directly from your activity to a question and answer session. And the question, of course, is, what is mindfulness? Briefly, I have some of the questions that people do tend to have also. But first, let's get some audience input as far as what mindfulness is. Go. Okay, up here on our board, you see we have some of the questions people tend to have. Is it always about meditation? Is meditation always the thing to do with mindfulness? I don't know. I know that meditation is a skill for building mindfulness abilities, and to be able to get into a sense of mindfulness, I guess, a little more easily is one way to put it. Um, I'm not sure. Okay, is mindfulness always about meditation? Okay. Is there a best way to learn to be mindful? For each individual person, I suppose, however people adapt to the skills the best, um, and how it is that people find their sense of the moment, and their balance. It can be also a very unique process, but also one that everyone shares. And how does practicing it help? Well, practicing helps because it's easier for a person once understanding how to be mindful and having the skills for balancing thoughts and feelings, and for balancing the experience that a person is in, to be able to reach that mindfulness, from moment to moment perception pretty quickly. And we'll talk a little bit about what alpha waves are, only briefly. But as people build these skills, they tend to stay in an alpha brainwave state a little more routinely. Are there any more questions? We've got the definitions we heard from, meditation perspectives, wellness perspectives, sometimes psychological perspectives. What would each of you think about answering that question? Or do you have any more questions? So this is the chart. This comes from Marsha Linehan's work. This is the researcher who went into Eastern philosophy to find out the best way to employ mindfulness in healing and helping people to heal and cope. Well, we found that mindfulness is so important, even in learning, that it's not necessarily something that has to be part of a healing program. But this is her program. As you can see, a person would like to stay in what's called wise mind. So wise mind in her work was a way of demonstrating and practicing mindfulness, and also defining what it is. So it's a way to balance the emotional out with the reasonable, and be in neither extreme at any given time, and having the skills to change the thought process associated with the experience, or the feelings associated with the experience, because they are in fact, two elements of the same experience, and being able to reach that center point. Okay, so here's what's coming up. We've reached our break. This is, I guess, 40 minutes now. And we're going to go over some of the more, I guess, I want to say practical aspects of the way that this kind of learning that we're doing today works, and the way that mindfulness helps in terms of communities of inquiry learning. We're going to discuss a little bit the self-paced, self-guided style of teaching and learning. We'll go over constructivism a little bit more, and then I'm going to discuss a couple of assessments that I found that do work for communities of inquiry, teams, and learning groups. Well, as we talked about, this mindfulness thing helps to achieve a balance between emotional and logical, or reasonable and feeling, depending. Either way of describing them is fine. It's what it is it's called a dialectic. And this dialectic is a way of describing a dynamic that we can become aware of as our experience may come from the perception of either extreme. And then we're able to bring that dialectic back toward balance, because we understand the way that our own internal processes are working with that sense of either extreme emotion or extreme logic. Okay, and this dialectical system was created by Marsha Linehan as a component of a therapy. However, we tend to educate people about the skills because they're very useful for anyone to be able to become a little more mindful and a little more capable of adapting to the community and the environment, or coping with the environment, the community, depending on how you look at it. Well, how? Let's start with communities of inquiry. Communities of inquiry are self-directed learners who become epistemically engaged in constructing their own systems for understanding the knowledge that is required for their community, in order to be able to bring it into the larger life context, and to be able to demonstrate mastery of the information and or the skills for learning. These communities create a sense of belonging Um, and if I talked about Abraham Maslow a little bit, maybe people do remember his stage theory having to do with first basic needs, security, and then belonging to a group. Um, and even though those were the aspects of Maslow that were published in the textbooks, Maslow did a lot more work than just the sense of belonging. He also talked about peak experiences and understanding people who were great leaders and learners. And so this sense of belonging can create a sense of achievement as well when there comes to be a connection between the experience of being in a learning group and bringing the learning to the group and helping others learn and demonstrating the skills for learning, and also that the learning the entire group is engaged in becomes relevant to the larger community. So this kind of folds into the idea of visible learning, how as people in communities that learn and that do things that are pro-social move into the larger community, they become more motivated. And also the community is more willing to accept their efforts. And then people are more aware of what's occurring in their classrooms. These learning teams are group focused. It's important to be able to interact in the groups and to be able to learn the skills for learning from each other, and also to be able to teach each other and to have that sense of guided instruction, even though the instructor is facilitating the teams and not necessarily providing all of the information directly. These groups can work online, in blended learning environments, or offline, as you'll see. So we needed to understand how well a community of learning was performing and how well students were able to learn the information and process the information that had to do with the content, knowledge in the course. So we created and implemented an assessment that was based on confidence. And it was reasoned that if students are becoming more confident by working together in teams to understand the content knowledge of the course, that confidence in each of the rubrics related to content knowledge in the course would increase. And it does. And it's a very good formative assessment that tells us what content areas we need to focus on. And there's also an aspect of the assessment that has only to do with working together in the group. There's also short answers, short answer questions on the form in order for a lot of feedback to be provided. And this helps me as an instructor work together with the student better in order to make sure that he or she is going to be able to meet the requirements of the course. And this assessment system, when we began implementing it, was working. It was demonstrating 1 or 2% increases per week, per rubric, for the groups overall. And one other interesting thing that happened was, as each of us were teaching, the assessments would react to the style that the teacher had. So this formative assessment was really telling us how to improve or decrease our presentation, focus on certain areas of the content in our presentation, and how it would differ, according to how well the students were reporting they were confident in the content areas of the presentation. So that was an excellent amount of feedback that allowed us to tailor each class and each part of the course to each audience that we would have. This also measures according to the course standards, because the way that the assessment system is created is based on the standards and the essential questions provided in the course. I usually use exactly 5 essential questions, and I always modify one so that it has to do with contributing knowledge to the course. It's a very good formative assessment, and it improves our connection between our learning groups and the instructor, and students and the instructor as well. The summative assessment was based on the Mindfulness Attention Awareness Scale. And the mass inventory works very well. It wasn't quite sensitive enough to pick up differences in mindfulness for each of the students. And we found that sometimes it was necessary to explain the key concepts that the mindfulness scale was asking for the student to respond according to, the different vernacular that would be used to describe the skills in the assessment. but it does. It can score the entire team, and it is very useful as a pre-assessment and a post hoc assessment. So if you run the assessment once for one particular class and then you run it at the end of the class, it demonstrates some useful data at that point as well. So those were the assessments that we had. So this is one of the slides that I mentioned, or may have mentioned. This is the mindfulness confidence per student in one of the mindfulness classes. And what I would like to point out is just the way that one teaching style can improve performance or confidence in one area of the learning while still maintaining the same overall performance. And secondly, the second approach to teaching the same content would change dynamically the way that the students were reporting how confident they were in each of the rubrics, or each of the information in each of the rubrics. So what's interesting about this is that the means were the same. So even though the distribution is different on each of the parts of the chart in each of the rubrics, the means were the same because this was a measure of only two classes that had occurred right next to each other. So this is how we found that this type of scale inventory really also assists with understanding how to change our approaches to teaching as well. These are all available on the website. If you choose to use the assessment system, it's on www.dxed.org. Alpha waves are present when people are focused and learning in their most motivated ways, as much as they are when they're present and meditating in a way that's extremely mindful, or studying a concept or koan. As people do in Buddhism, they come up with logical puzzles to try and solve while meditating, and those are generally called koans. These processes of learning present alpha frequency waves in their EEG frequencies. Now, there's a lot of research out there right now that's really very cutting edge, and there's a lot of people finding out new ways to detect alpha waves. But we know that mindfulness and alpha waves, are related somehow. And so it is useful to teach people abilities for being able to meditate or rest the mind and become mindful, to sort of drop right into that alpha brainwave state. And these can be exercises like meditation. These can be exercises that have to do with the Marshall Linehan skill set. But either way, we know that this helps balance out the brain. And I'm going to talk a little bit about brain balance, or balancing the skills that the brain presents here shortly. As people are more capable of sort of summoning their ability to be mindful and focus on alpha states through practice, they can also then demonstrate the skills for empathy and other things more routinely and in a better way. Okay, how is teamwork solving major social problems? How does mindfulness and empathy improve, upon a society that has fewer problems overall? Well, social problems are represented by many people having difficulty to solve their own problems and to adapt to others as they're coexisting in the larger social space. There becomes a conflict between sort of the one person and the rest of the community. And this is because people haven't had the connection with the larger society that maybe they might need, or the recognition from the larger society that maybe they might need, or really the understanding or acceptance, that sense of belonging that we talked about with Abraham Maslow. There can also be extreme external or intergroup conditions and conflicts that can cause suffering. This includes terse interpretations of sign, signals, or nonverbal communications because of intergroup bias. So communications can be pretty difficult for groups that don't get along because the cultural aspects aren't the same, and it's difficult to accept one culture to always be able to get along with another culture. But through empathy, we feel that perhaps groups can understand each other and be able to work together, improving society, especially through things like the much larger community. We start thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals that were created by the United Nations, which we support as an organization. So let's go over that modular theory really quickly. I'm going to try to explain the way that our minds balance out learning. And I spoke briefly about Stephen Mithen's work before, the skill modules for adaptation that evolved as a part of human survival. Well, There's the intuitive psychology and the intuitive ecology that allow people to cope with, well, not really cope with, but to proactively engage in the environment and to develop relationships with both the people and aspects of the ecology that help to support survival. The mind can do this in two ways. It's very balanced and symmetrical. In dealing with what is, we have the forward thinking. This is one way of dealing with things. We can put ourselves into the ecology of the larger environment, and we can become part of, empathically part of the larger society in the larger life context. This is a proactive adaptation that helps us to become a larger part of the larger life context and to settle identity conflicts that may exist by contributing to the larger group. Mentalizing is a process for finding meaning in the expressions and language and behavior of others, and being able to match that meaning, thereby empathizing with the others' thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and having a schema for understanding those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors as a part of connecting with those other people as well. Mentalizing is very much like empathy. These are the forward-thinking skills. These are the positive skills moving into society and helping to contribute to society. The back-thinking skills are being able to cope with adversity, to engage in distress tolerance, to regulate our emotions, and to react and adapt. React and adapt to the external environment in a way that is effective. These adaptations and skills are all based on the same neurological structures. There's a cortex in the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex that connects with both of these types of skill networks, the forward thinking and the back thinking. And the forward thinking tends to have more to do with temporal lobe activity and the hippocampus. And the back thinking tends to have more to do with the prefrontal cortex and the ACC itself. And so if you think about the image of the mind, you can understand both of these streams. They're referred to as streams and networks existing in a map or pattern that starts with ACC, and the forward thinking is the back one, and the back thinking is the forward one, which is much like our brains are. They're balanced, and the way that we understand them is sometimes inverse. For example, the occipital lobe and visual cortex actually receive the information that we call sight in a way that's upside down, but our brains translate it back to right side up. You might have known that. I just think it's an interesting way to look at it. But when we're practicing meditation and adaptation that's successful, when we're mindfully adapting, and when we're coping in a way that's effective, these areas of the brain tend to improve. And those areas of the brain that have improved in those kinds of studies have also been implicated as a counterindication for other kinds of illness, other kinds of behaviors that are destructive. So the more we exercise mindfulness and the ability to actively cope successfully and the ability to adapt successfully, the stronger those skills become. And the happier people tend to be, getting back to the idea that people who are happier also take less time to get well. They don't get sick as often, and tend to be a more functional part of our groups in society. Now, I mentioned a couple of networks, patterns in the brain, the cycle that signals go through. Well, our brains are very symmetrical and aesthetic. And somebody knew this. His name was Tony Buzan. And he created a system of mnemonic tools that are called mind maps. I'm sure mind maps are something everybody knows about a little bit, but they are very, very helpful in terms of creating memories. But what you'll notice is that they have the same kinds of patterns and symmetrical patterns as aesthetically as beautiful things in the external environment also have aesthetically. And this is where he started his work. And so just noticing the aesthetics of learning, we have to have a way to do the forward thinking and a way to do the backward thinking. And our minds have modules, either psychology or ecology, or different kinds of skills There's Wernicke's area and Broca's area that synthesize our experience through the employment of both hemispheres. These hemispheres are balanced in a way and more functional in a way when we're mindful and when we have the skills that are needed for improving these networks. So they in a way expand our consciousness the same way that Tony Buzan showed us that the functional networks expand our memories. And having all of these modules working in harmony tends to create a more balanced state. We're not unbalanced. It's more difficult to knock us over or to prevent us from accomplishing the things that we're setting out to do, or to help the group in the way that we had decided to do. It's aesthetically more effective, I guess is the way that I would put it, to have all of the brain networks working in harmony, creating the ability and strengthening the ability to cope. It improves functioning overall, improves our adaptation and either forward thinking or back thinking. And it can heal social problems because, as we had said, the social problems had to do with not being able to cope or adapt with the larger community. Traditional education is a circle process. Much like the cycle of learning, learning occurs in a circle in groups. And so we know that it may be difficult to just put a bunch of people together and ask them to learn something right away. So there's a traditional method for this called peacemaking that's been adapted as something that's called a circle process. And that's the K. Pranis book that you might see in our works cited. But here's what I would like everybody to do. Just kind of jump into this. If you're reluctant, that's okay. Let's break up into 4 groups again, but let's make sure they're not the same ones. How about everybody just go to the group that they thought they'd like to be a part of, even possibly from the other side of the room, during the previous activity. And there, you'll find a quill. And this is our talking quill. So, and there's also a computer. And here's what we need to work out. For the first part of the exercise, everybody get together in your groups. And here's what we do. The person with the quill, that's the talking quill, is going to start by introducing himself or herself. And then you're going to pass the quill around the circle to do so with the rest of your group. And what I need you to do as a process of negotiation is to figure out who's going to be the group's secretary for recording the things that you learn, how that you learned them, and whether or not you feel that the knowledge is objective and could be peer reviewed. Someone will come around to assist you with the quills, because eventually we know that your group will start functioning in a self-regulated way. So let's establish some norms for each of the groups, things that you don't do, which mostly is just stepping on each other's toes. And I'll write those down over here. And then we'll allow your groups 20 or 25 minutes to come together and figure out the best way to understand Tony Buzan mind maps and who Tony Buzan was and why he started studying his mnemonics. If it's not congruent with my part of the presentation, that's fine. I love learning new things too. Sometimes we do, as instructors, learn new things. So here are your norms, here are your groups, and this is 25 minutes. Write down everything you can about the subject by working together. And someone will be by to help you with the quills or with other parts of this exercise as well. So, from an intuitive perspective, having processed the information that you learned about, did any of you find that you already had the skills for this? This intuitive psychology and intuitive ecology, did these skills help you to adapt to working in a group? Was it mentalizing or empathy? Well, the answer is, of course, yes and yes. And then for the one that is it empathy or mentalization, the answer is yes. Because you see, what we've done here is balance each other out. Everybody has different learning styles that you can use to help get information for members of the group, or you can teach people learning skills that you might have known or not known. And in contributing to the group, it feels better to belong to the group and to be effective in getting something done. So this affects both efficacy and confidence. And that efficacy and confidence is really the solution that we needed to a lot of problems in our classes. So, okay, now we're back. We talked about feedback, the best ways to get feedback from students and to be able to incorporate feedback into the learning plan. These were the excerpts that I got from an A+ interview with one of the instructors working on the project. The best thing to do when creating classes is to prepare well, to create the space so that students feel safe to explore, to set clear expectations, to actively listen or be able to redirect the discussion as necessary, to address feedback in a timely way, and to accept critical feedback the most. It's very, very easy to learn from something that's critical. It's very difficult to learn what we should be doing by receiving a compliment. So we're working on developing online communities of inquiry and discussion groups, as the Shea and Bigerano article mentioned. And so on the site that you see here, the Visible Learning page contains a couple of ways for educators to collaborate. There are Google Groups message boards, and it's also possible, we're working on setting up a meetup.com group for educators that we don't mind if it's copied in other locations, to be able to meet, within a specific location or city and collaborate on designing lesson plans and resources for the classes. Our assessment was developed based on psychological instruments called Likert scales. The efficacy of the assessment is still something that I'm developing, but we do know that it measures the approaches that individual instructors take to teaching, as well as measuring the confidence of the student in each of the rubrics that are part of the course. And the reason that I chose to assess confidence was because this was also a measure of the integration of each student into the work groups that are present in the course, and to understand how confident the student feels in whether he or she knows the material, the content material that's in the coursework as well. This system is based on some research that you can find in the free Meaningful Learning manuscript that we gave you as a part of this presentation as well. So in this part of the presentation, I collect feedback from the audience related to the elements that I presented were part of the course earlier in the course. We'll go ahead and open the floor up to questions. Feel free to critique any of the elements that you see here, as well as to provide feedback and ask questions about the presentation that you've seen so far. Okay, so now that we're leaving, let's do something actionable. Let's do a brainstorm. Let's mind map the impacts of communities of inquiry learning, empathy, and mindfulness really quickly. I'll give each of you a category, the categories are social relevance, public health and social improvement, personal health, wellness, or anything that you could come up with. So let's draw a mind map on the tab over here that says empathy. And then each of these three branches will have to take comments from and to store the comments on. And then also, do we need another branch between social relevance, public health, social improvement, or personal health and wellness? Is there another thing? Okay. And so that's what we'll talk about. Let's just try not to interrupt each other, but carry on with the best way that this type of project improves any of these aspects.